our human nature is we respond to what we see, right? And we respond to visible wounds, right? That's why if you're wounded, being an amputee is a lot sexier for the photograph than being someone that has an invisible wound, right? Such as TBI or post-traumatic stress. And so it's been fascinating for almost a decade now belonging to this community of disabled Americans, of watching America respond, watching the military respond physically to my presence.
Army Major Dennis D.J. Skelton has garnered national attention since November 6, 2004, when he was seriously injured by an RPG during a fight against enemy combatants. His condition was so severe, some news media called him America's most wounded soldier.
One of the soldiers took a spent .50 cal shell through the neck, and that was my trach, that was my airway. The reason being is because I had no mouth. Most of my eye was an exit wound, not an entry wound, so I have a very small scar here, which we assume was shrapnel that came in, and it went out the eye and it destroyed everything in its path. So the upper jaw, the upper palate, the roof of the mouth, all of that is just gone. My left arm was destroyed pretty acutely. My left hand was intact, but everything was destroyed from the hand to the elbow. My ammunition belt, it got really hot, especially when the RPG went off. And so a lot of my ammunition started cooking off, right? So if you want to know what a magazine looks like, I had a complete magazine go in and out. And then a bunch of AK-47 rounds that went through different various parts.
You describe these incredible events in a very nonchalant manner that makes it difficult to catch the import of it sometimes. But you mentioned you were in Walter Reed for something like, you mentioned years, not months.
I was an inpatient for about a year, just under a year, on and off. And then essentially I was an outpatient for about 6 years. So I did about 70 surgeries at Walter Reed and Bethesda from 2004 to 2010.
What was that number again?
About 70 surgeries.
70 surgeries.
And then with that, all the physical therapies and all the other care that goes with that. And there was no shortage of doctors that would tell me everything I would never do the rest of my life. You'll never walk again, you'll never run again, you'll never climb again, you'll never ski again. You never do all these things that define myself and my happiness and my quality of life. So that was hard for me to accept, but at the same time, I had these real issues of, okay, how am I gonna write? How am I gonna speak? How am I gonna walk? And had to go all the way back to childhood at a time that I couldn't remember learning how to do these things.
But with time, surgery, and emotional support, Skelton did recover. And as he rebuilt himself, he noticed the military medical system was lacking in certain ways for soldiers and their families. For example, when his parents came to see him at Walter Reed, they faced armed guards demanding official documentation. These experiences led Skelton to write Our Hero Handbook, a comprehensive guide to assist families in understanding and navigating the military medical system. The book would be the first step in Skelton's efforts to change policy regarding injured soldiers. And his dedication to this cause gained attention in the Pentagon. Skelton served as a military advisor to then Deputy Secretary of Defense Gordon England on Veterans Affairs and care for wounded service members. And he served as a special assistant to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, seeing after veterans transition issues, wounded warrior policy, and improving services to military families.
My work and thoughts had kind of gravitated away from wounded warriors into this larger picture of veteran transition, and we were starting to see a rise in America in veteran homelessness from our generation and unemployment and what Admiral Mullen calls this sea of goodwill. We come back from war and we have this amazing nation that now embraces us, which wasn't the case in Vietnam. And there's no shortage of support. But how do you navigate it? Right. And the tens of thousands of of nonprofits out there that now provide some service to veterans and wounded warriors. That's a lot of business cards. And when you're sitting in a hospital and everybody swings by and gives you a business card, and then you can't remember who's what, and then people say, hey, I'll help you out. And they say that because they mean well. Right. But at the end of the day, a lot of offerings of support, they don't necessarily have a capability. So we started, that had a negative effect in the wounded warrior community. Sure. And I saw that bleeding over to the veteran. Americans wanted to help, but at the end of the day, in what capacity, and how do we help our veterans navigate that so they can find education, employment, healthcare, quality of life things.
Skelton has also worked with private organizations, such as the Center for a New American Security and the Wounded Warrior Foundation, to assist soldiers in post-traumatic recovery.
Just because of the fact that they lost a limb or they may be blind, they still have their heart, they still have their intellect, they still have their will, and that's something that we really needed to retain in the U.S. military.
This is Skelton in May 2010, taking part in Operation Proper Exit, where veterans returned to Iraq in an effort to find closure.
I wanted to help the Army evolve to the point where it's no longer a weapon system that's the most important feature, but it's us as human beings, as warriors, that are the most valuable weapon that we have. And we need our policies and our command structures need to reflect that. It doesn't matter if you lost your limbs, it doesn't matter how bad you're wounded. If you want to do something in life, go do it. Don't let any policy or regulation prevent you from following whatever dream yours.
In 2011, Skelton did something many thought impossible for seriously wounded soldiers. He deployed to Afghanistan and took command of a unit.
I just remember when I left Washington, D.C., I was told that I probably would never go back into a command position. I led some of those discussions in high policy committees in the Pentagon, and I didn't necessarily disagree with, right? If we're going to ask Americans to give their sons and daughters, we probably need to provide the most physically and mentally sound leaders to do that. And the reality was I was not 100% in either front, and I never would be, right? I'd always be acting at a deficit. And one thing led to another. When I showed up, and there was a dire need for commanders, and an opportunity arose for me to assume command of a cavalry unit in the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, and it just so happened to be the exact same company that I was a platoon in when I got injured. None of that was by design. I showed up, I assumed command, and immediately went down to Panjwai, and which is one of the handful of Taliban holdouts along the Pakistani border up the Karnak, and stood there for the next 6 months.
How was that experience getting back in a striker unit?
You know, my only experience was the Second Battle of Fallujah, and that was my normal. Mm-hmm. So going back into another not as hostile but more sustained hostile environment was natural. You know, going back into the infantry was personally for me to close a chapter, and I needed that to move forward with my recovery, to be able to have that reunion, to be able to bring soldiers back. Was very powerful for me. I didn't have that opportunity as a platoon leader. And you know, I don't dwell on it negatively, but you know, there is that sense that you abandon your soldiers in the battlefield. And so I was, that chapter, coming back to Germany, redeployment, all of that was amazing for me in my recovery, not so good for the organization that I served in. So I'm now just DJ that was once wounded a decade ago.
Skelton says his priorities have changed in recent years. He is near completing his graduate studies in national security affairs at the Naval Postgraduate School. He founded Paradox Sports, his own nonprofit to help the personal growth of disabled citizens, and he and his wife recently welcomed their first child to the world. But of course, one particular thing hasn't changed.
I thoroughly enjoy helping ensure that our wounded warriors and our veterans and their families that need help and need assistance know where to go, that are given every opportunity to get access to resources at the right time in the right place in the right way that is good for them. And we have a lot of work to do in that. We're making progress, but we do have a lot of work to do.